Hi, in this video we're going to talk just a little bit about some short-term liquidity ratios. So first thing that you probably need to know is what the heck do we mean by that? Short-term liquidity is generally defined as being able to pay your bills that are going to come up in the next year or less. And so they really focus on being able to pay off accounts payable, current liabilities, maybe current taxes due, those sorts of things. They don't necessarily think in terms of your ability to pay off all your debts 10, 15 years in the future. So obviously, since they're focused on that, they're most relevant to creditors who are expecting to receive some payment within the next year, and they're just trying to gauge what ability you have to meet that obligation. Because the short-term liquidity of a firm can change rapidly, if you're focused on this, you probably go get information, maybe even request it from the company to recalculate those ratios fairly frequently, possibly monthly, depending on the situation, and if they're really in a difficult cash position, maybe even more frequently than monthly, or quarterly as they issue their reports. So let's start talking about these ratios. Going to start with sort of the one that number one is commonly used, but is also really covers the longest period of time. That's the current ratio, and it's certainly simply current assets over current liabilities. So the way to think about that is remember in your current account, you have the cash you have right now, you have your inventory right now, you have the receivables that you expect to get paid on, but those are the accounts receivable you have. And so the idea would basically be that if that's all you had no more money come in later from new sales, other than to liquidate the inventory you have right now, how well could that pay your bills? And so, if you're somebody that you turn over your inventory every month or so, then you're not really this measure isn't taking into account that you might have 12 months worth of this inventory, this amount of inventory, and be able to sell that, get the profits from it to help pay for it. And so it really is. We think of this as sort of a liquidation scenario. Imagine that I take the cash I have right now, I collect all the receivables I have right now, and I sell off all the inventory I have right now and don't do anything else. Would that be enough to meet my current liabilities? Ideally, you always want that to be greater than one. You can improve it by increasing cash. You can improve it by increasing inventory or current or accounts receivable, but it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do those things just to improve this number. More often, what makes sense is to decrease liabilities. The next ratio is the quick ratio, sometimes called the acid ratio. And in this one, you don't count the inventory, so it's really just cash and accounts receivable usually over this. And so this is an even more short-term sort of thing. Typically, a company's accounts receivable policy might be 30, 60, maybe out to 90 days, usually not much longer than that. And so it really speaks to how much cash you could raise. Let's say if you did no more business, had no more sales, and you just had the cash you have now plus the current the accounts receivable that you'll collect. And so clearly much more focused on sort of a more extreme scenario. This might be relevant. For example, sometimes the inventory in some companies doesn't turn over very fast, and so you don't really count on them to satisfy current liabilities, and so you may want to use this. Examples of that might be companies that make parts for nuclear plants or something like that. We don't build a lot of new nuclear plants. They don't generally need new parts very often. They don't go down very often. And so you may have equipment that you build that sits there for 2 or 3 years at a time before it sells. So in those situations, including inventory may not make sense. Similarly, you may have companies that are in such dire financial situation that you're not even sure that the inventory that they have can be sold soon enough to meet the bills before they get shut down. And so, you don't want to stand in line for that, so you may go for something like this. Again, generally would be a focus for holders of debt that need to be paid in the next maybe 90 days, sometime equal to or less than whatever the term on the accounts receivable is. So once again, you can increase cash, and one may, what's interesting here, whereas with the current ratio, if you were to sell off your inventory and just simply convert it to cash, that wouldn't improve that ratio. In this case, selling inventory, not replacing it and just holding the inventory as cash, would actually improve the situation. And so you can improve your quick ratio by not replacing inventory when it sells. And so therefore lowering your inventory could improve this. And also you can improve it by reducing liabilities. The most restrictive one of these is the cash ratio. It doesn't even consider accounts receivable. And so it's just cash over current liabilities. Absolutely the most short-term view of liquidity. It assumes that you're not, that you're only going to be able to use cash, no income, no receivables, no inventory. And so, particularly since most places that have accounts receivable have a 30-day or more kind of policy, many of them do, I shouldn't say most. This is probably a measure for somebody that wants to know whether there's enough cash there to meet the obligations within the next 30 days or less. So very, very short-term liquidity. And again, you can sell off inventory. You could maybe reduce your accounts receivable policy so that people have to pay faster, and those things would go into cash. Those would improve this ratio, and obviously, again, reducing your current liabilities would improve this. That's pretty much it on short-term liabilities and short-term liquidity ratios. Pretty straightforward stuff.